What are you doing here? What time is it? You can't be here. You can't see my 15-year-old IKEA bedside tables. That's so embarrassing. I make furniture. I'll fix it this weekend, okay? Just this weekend, I'll do it. Just please go away. Let me have my beauty sleep.
Now, I know what you might be thinking. Haven't we seen a million bedside table builds on YouTube that take like a month? And yeah, I've seen those too, and whilst they're mesmerising, let's be honest, most of us don't have that kind of time. We've got jobs or families or social lives, the list goes on. But that doesn't mean we can't have beautiful handcrafted furniture in our homes. So today, I'm hoping to prove that you can build a gorgeous piece of furniture without sacrificing a month's worth of weekends. We're keeping it simple, efficient, and achievable. Oh, good morning. Welcome to this episode from Range Woodworking. After that little home invasion before, I'm now all sorted and ready to go. It's just after 11 AM on Saturday morning, and fingers crossed we can get all this done by tomorrow evening. So let's not waste any more time and get started. Now, I have a limited amount of oak, so I entered all of my pieces into Cut List Optimizer to lay them out efficiently with minimal waste. I love this free program, I'll link it below. The start of day one is all about laying the foundation. I start by jointing, thicknessing, and rough cutting the boards down to size. Due to my space and equipment limitations, I find the best thing to do first, where possible, is to break down the long boards into more manageable lengths. Ideally, I'd have a miter station to quickly chop these boards down, but I don't. So I'm going to use my jigsaw, which I have seen in the past hates cutting oak. But a jigsaw is safer than a circular saw, and my circular saw and batteries for my other circular saw is off at another project at the moment. The jigsaw does a fine job. It's a bit slower and makes a bit of a smoky mess of the cut, but that's not really important at the moment because they'll get cut to their finished size much later. I'll wheel my jointer into a bit of space and clean up one face of each board and one edge before taking them over to the thicknesser and bringing all the pieces down to a uniform 20mm thickness. I should add, as is the case anytime you're working against the clock, I lost about 30 minutes fixing up my jointer before I could do anything as the pulley had slipped off. Man, I just love the look of white oak straight out of the thicknesser. Okay, so I spent 2.5 hours at the jointer and the thicknesser. I'm now going to cut these boards down on the table saw to something a bit closer to their final dimensions. So, as you heard there, 2.5 hours to get to this point. Now, if you don't have as much time or less equipment than me, you could benefit from skipping this stage altogether by purchasing pre-dressed timber. In Australia, this is labelled as DAR, which stands for dressed all round. And in the US, it's S4S, which is surfaced on 4 sides. Now, as I said, it's time to cut all of my pieces out of the boards. I'm still not cutting everything to final dimensions, and that's because it's good practice to keep everything as big as you can for as long as you can. I'll explain why and a bit more on that later, but you can really benefit from keeping an order of operations in mind with these projects. As I had a limited time frame, it made sense to me here that gluing up the panels that make the main box bodies of the nightstands would be well worth doing as early as possible. The main places I'm going to lose time on this project is waiting for glue and finish to dry. So I'll take my panel pieces and apply a healthy amount of polyurethane glue to the joint and clamp away. These panels will be too wide for my thicknesser after gluing, so I make sure to apply the clamps to the edges of the join and call across the middle of the board to keep everything well aligned. And when both of my panels are glued and clamped, I can put them to one side for a couple of hours whilst the glue cures. Now, I designed this project in Fusion 360. But on projects with a bunch of angles, I find it easiest to get a piece of scrap and draw out a full-size version of the thing I'm making. In this case, I know the height I want my base to be and how wide it needs to be, so I draw this out and then use one of my leg pieces as a template for the angles. I can then clamp a piece of scrap along where the base will be and along the line I've just drawn to measure the angle with a bevel gauge. Once this is set, make sure to keep it locked in and put to one side. I can then rip the leg pieces down to their final width and set up my miter gauge with that angle I measured before. After cutting one end of the leg, I can position it on my drawing to get the final length and cut them all down to the final length using a stop block. Time to cut the brace pieces between the front and back legs. These will have angled sides to match the angle of the legs, so I'll use that bevel gauge set to the same angle as before to tilt the blade. After giving it my best Vincent Vega impression whilst trying to look for my push stick, I can cut an angle on one side of these. And this creates something of an issue because I want to cut a parallel face, but as you can see here, the wedge shape can go under the fence, which I don't like. Partly because it can be inaccurate, and partly because I don't want it getting stuck and causing a kickback or something violent. To get around this, I eventually have the brainwave to shift the fence onto the other side of the blade, and then I can rip the pieces safely. For my first one, I'll rip it down and compare to one of the legs, and just sneak up on the right width until it's the perfect size. And then when I've ripped all of those, it's time to reset the miter gauge to square and cross-cut them to length with a bit of scrap, trying to minimize any blowout. This measurement can be pretty arbitrary. Obviously, the larger it is, the more stable the nightstands will be, but as long as they're all the same, it'll be okay. I guess that's true of most pieces, really. The panels should be good to go now, and I'll indulge in a quick bit of glue scraping, which is always satisfying. I'll trim one side and one edge of both panels before setting a stop block and cross-cutting them to size before ripping to the final width. Where possible, I try to cross-cut before ripping so that the tear out from the cross-cut is removed with the final rip. I then go through all of this again with the side pieces, sneaking up on my crosscut with the micro adjust on the miter gauge until they're perfect. Okay, all of our box pieces are at final size, and I'm going to go ahead and address something that I know is going to come up. I didn't plan ahead appropriately for this, and I am concerned that the way I will glue this up with the side pieces running perpendicular to the top and bottom won't allow for wood movement and might shift or break down the track. Had I planned ahead, I could have potentially avoided this, but I also think this way looks quite good too. I will be sure to post on my social medias should anything come awry down the track, so make sure you go and follow me there. I'll have my links in the description. Now, I'm in a hurry and I've lost a fair bit of time today, which I'll cover at the end, so I'm going to speed things up and use the domino joiner to add strength to the butt joints that make this box. To be honest, with material this thick and general loading of a bedside table or nightstand, it might not need the extra strength, but I'm going to play it safe. As per usual, dominoes are not mandatory in this construction. Strength could be added with screws and plugs, dowels, or a form of feature through dowels. I use the tabs on each side of the domino to reference my mortises, and then switch to a large mortise for the one in the middle of the board too. It's a bit awkward trying to set up for these pieces because I'm very simple. With the domino, it's important to maintain the same reference face to make sure everything lines up. So for these pieces, I've added the support to the domino and plunged the machine in from an awkward position. It's weird, but it worked for me. Now, as you can see here, it's 6:45, so the window for work is starting to close for the day. I'm going to sand the inside of the box because applying finish after it's glued up is awkward, and I'm going to try to preserve the natural look and character of this oak with this Osmo Poly X hard wax oil in raw. I've taped off where the glue will go, and I apply the finish with a white Scotch-Brite pad before wiping away any excess and letting the rest dry. Well, there you have it. It's 7:30 and I'm calling it a day. Didn't get as far as I'd like, but did get finish on, so I'll let that dry overnight and get stuck into it tomorrow. So it's at 7:30, it means it's been an 8-hour day plus half an hour for lunch, which is pretty reasonable, and we'll see how we go tomorrow. Well, good morning. As you can see, it's 8:40 on Sunday morning. First things first, I'm going to quickly rough over yesterday's finish with a maroon Scotch-Brite pad and then put a second coat on the inside, and then we'll move forwards with the rest of the base. Okay. Hitting it with this pad helps knock off any dust nibs or raised fibers in the finish before I hit it with its second coat. Alright, that second coat of finish is on and I've put them aside to dry. I've just been told by Mrs. Range Woodworking that I've got to go sell a bathtub, which isn't ideal, but I will also go to the hardware store and get some drawer slides because I completely forgot about those, which also isn't ideal, and the hardware store on a weekend is amongst my least favourite places. However, probably lose about an hour and a half doing this. When I come back, I'll get stuck into the base. Seriously. Alright, I'm back. It's 10:45, so it took about an hour and a half. Let's get started on these bases. My premium cutting edge technology drawing makes a return today. Again, I'll clamp down a solid reference piece at the bottom and position a leg in place before clamping it there also. I can then put a couple of offcuts down as support pieces before putting another leg in position with a stop at each side. And now that I know that everything is lined up correctly, I can mark for my half lap. For a bit of extra precision, I scribe my cuts with a marking knife so that I can sneak up on the perfect fit. Fortunately, I only have to do this once because I'll set stop blocks to make them all the same. The bevel gauge makes another appearance to measure this angle before I transfer that back to my miter gauge. I've also installed a dado stack here to try buy a little time. So getting as close as physically possible to my table saw blade, I'll try line up my stop blocks on the narrow side of things so that I can sneak up on the perfect fit with the micro adjust on the miter gauge. There's a whole lot of sneaking in this cut. I planned on sneaking up on the width of the half lap, but accidentally nailed it the first time. I'll also raise the blade little by little until perfectly halfway through. To keep things simple, I'm going to mark the joins and pairs so I don't confuse myself down the way. Speaking of confusing, quickly clamping this base together was not the easiest thing, but it did let me mark for the dominoes. And then cutting mortises into these small pieces is another challenge, especially in the skinny leg pieces that I clamp into my vise. But the good news is the dominoes make the glue up much simpler than when I was trying to dry fit everything with just clamps. And once that's all together, it's actually pretty encouraging. I'll put it to one side and let the glue cure. And it's time to finally glue the drawer box up. There's not really much to this. The cuts are all square and the dominoes keep everything aligned, so I'll just throw some glue around and mash it all together. Glamorous, right? Now the tight dominoes certainly keep everything pretty rigid, even requiring a bit of good old-fashioned CPR to get the top on, and then a few hundred clamps for good measure before getting into the corners inside and wiping any excess glue squeeze out away. These bases aren't particularly easy to sand, but with my less than perfect time management, I'll use my sander for as much as possible and then break all the edges over by hand before adding a first coat of hard wax oil with the usual method. And whilst in the zone, I sanded and finished the main body too, before a quick time check. And some finish. Okay, I had completely forgotten that I needed to make the actual drawer boxes for these side tables. So they won't be pretty, but they'll be plenty strong enough and pretty quick to whip up. I start by negotiating some space at the table saw and ripping some lengths. I'll then cut these pieces down to size that will make the sides. These can be whatever length. For the front and backs of the drawer, I simply put the drawer slides and drawer sides into the space and measure what's left and cut a couple of pieces. I don't love it, but I'm going to construct the boxes with glue and pocket screws. The pocket screws just go in the front and back pieces, so they'll always be hidden anyway. And as a handy bit of foreshadowing, I wish I'd paid more attention to me just saying that the pocket screws go in the front and back pieces. I'll glue the boxes up using band clamps. And once initially in place, I add some glue and a clamping square to a corner before adding another clamp to hold the pieces perfectly in place for the pocket screws. I've found that pocket holes tend to be a bit squirrely and shift when you're trying to tighten everything up. so the clamp holds everything where it needs to be. Because of the screws, I don't really feel like I need to wait for the glue to dry, so I'll measure and simply cut a rectangular base before gluing and pin nailing it in place. Time to offer up the drawer, and evidently I forgot that pocket holes go in the front and the back of the drawer boxes, and that in these bedside tables, the front and the back are the long pieces. A quick round of the table saw and we're good to go, so I can measure for the drawer face. When it comes to the drawer faces, I like to measure like it owes me money, as Mario the Woodfather says. And with that kind of methodology, you get results. A quick sand and coat of finish, and it's time to start putting the final table together. But not before taking a minute to flip and turn the table base until I'm happy that I've got the best side showing. I'll attach the top using these figure 8 fasteners. They're quick and easy and allow for wood movement in more considered designs, and I'll have a link for some below. To install the drawer slides, I just offset the slides from the base of the box using a slim scrap piece, and back from the front of the box using a combination square set to the thickness of the drawer faces. Then I can just drop some 3mm pieces of ply on the bottom and insert the drawer box on top of those, and just pull the rails out and attach them flush with the front of the drawer box, sliding them out one screw at a time with lots of support until they're all done. And then test the soft close. I just need to release the gas struts from behind from when I was installing them. A combination square makes quick work of making sure the base is central on the box before attaching with screws. The easiest way to install drawer faces that I have found is simply to put the drawer face on and pack the gap at the top and on one side with as many playing cards as possible. I then remove the cards, count them, and split the number between the top, bottom, and each sides to get a perfectly even reveal. Once I have my number of cards, I can take the face off and apply some double-sided tape to temporarily hold the face in place whilst I screw it in more permanently. Well, it's not permanent because I can always remove the screws, but it's more permanent than the tape. Alright, it's 8:15, I'm calling it a day there. I'd say it was pretty successful. Obviously I didn't quite finish, so a failure on that front. I did lose a bit of time fixing my jointer yesterday. I started late yesterday, had to go out today. I'm just making excuses, and obviously filming takes up some of the time as well. But it's not all bad. I did manage to get that far into a second one at the same time. So, you know, it seems pretty achievable in a weekend if you're undistracted and prepared, unlike me. I hope you've enjoyed that video. If you have, please consider liking and subscribing. And until next time, take it easy.